It started with a sound, so soft it might have been imagined, a subtle chime from the corner of the kitchen where Grayson's MacBook rested, closed but alive, like something breathing under its skin. Vivienne Hart didn't plan to touch it. She never did. Her mornings were a clockwork rhythm of almond milk lattes, banana pancakes for their son Noah, and a quick scroll through morning emails before the city of Chicago fully awoke. But something about that sound, sharp, crystalline, called to her, a frequency only pain could detect. She crossed the room. The screen had come to life on its own, glowing faintly with the Apple logo, and in the bottom right corner, a notification. New video uploaded to iCloud from iPhone, 9:07 a.m. Her hand hovered, not touching, just observing, almost hoping it would disappear. But it didn't. It blinked again, and that was the moment her life quietly split in two. She tapped the trackpad. The screen brightened. A thumbnail hovered mid-screen. A frozen frame of Grayson, bare-chested, eyes half-lidded, face flushed under morning light, not from their home, but from a hotel room she recognized too well. A boutique suite, with a cherrywood headboard and minimalist art. The same one they'd escaped to for their 4th anniversary. Vivienne clicked before she could stop herself. The video opened mid-laughter. Grayson's voice, relaxed, intoxicated, unfamiliar in its softness. "Don't worry," he whispered. The lens shifted, jerky, intimate, as though placed on a nightstand. Then came a second voice, her voice. Delilah Moore. "She thinks you're in back-to-back meetings, right?" she purred. Then, the kiss. Not hungry, not rushed. A kiss that spoke of routine, of ownership, of secrets kept long enough to taste sweet. Vivienne's lungs forgot how to function. Delilah. Her best friend since freshman orientation. Maid of honor. Godmother to Noah. The woman who once cried with her in a bathroom stall over heartbreak and swore they'd always be each other's constant. That same Delilah now lay wrapped in her husband's arms like she'd always belonged there. The silk robe she wore, wasn't it the one Vivienne gifted her last Christmas? The laughter, the caresses, the way Grayson called her Dee, a nickname only Vivienne had once known. The room was too quiet. Her heart beat, a snare drum behind her ears. A faint sizzle from the kitchen pan reminded her she was burning breakfast, but the smell of eggs turning bitter barely registered. She rewound the video. Play. Rewind. Play. Every frame pressed itself into her retina like a brand. She wasn't looking for proof anymore. She was memorizing betrayal. And then, something new. At timestamp 0027, a soft chime in the video. A text notification popped on Grayson's phone, visible in the corner of the shot. The name, Ava Sterling, legal team. The preview, documents filed. Power of attorney still incomplete without Vivienne's signature. The message vanished too quickly. But it was enough. Not just an affair, a setup, a plan. Her name, legal documents, something about her being signed away. Vivienne's fingers twitched. The betrayal was not just carnal. It was tactical, strategic. Delilah didn't just take her husband. She was helping him erase her. Legally, financially, spiritually, a ghost in her own life. She stood there motionless, framed by morning light and silence, a woman being rewritten in real time. Then, slowly, as if time itself were recalibrating, she walked down the hallway past her son's room, Noah still playing with dinosaur toys, blissfully unaware, and into the master bedroom. There, in the drawer of her vanity, beneath old receipts and half-used lipstick tubes, lay a relic of a different era. A silver voice recorder, long forgotten, but perfectly functional. She held it in her hand for a beat, feeling its weight. She turned it on. The battery light blinked green. That was all she needed. Vivienne didn't need justice to knock. she was already unlocking the door. Because sometimes betrayal doesn't come from enemies. It comes from those who know your alarm code. And karma? It doesn't miss. If you found yourself in Vivienne's place, would you fight back or walk away? Comment your truth below. And don't forget, subscribe to Karma Strikes, where betrayal never goes unanswered. The air was still perfumed with Delilah's signature scent, orange blossom and deceit. It lingered long after she had left Vivienne's home 2 days prior, embedded in the scarf she forgot on the kitchen chair, in the throw pillow she hugged while laughing at some inside joke with Grayson, and, most of all, in the silence that had settled like a fog. Vivienne moved through her house not like a ghost, but like a crime scene technician, documenting every fragment of what once was her life. Every mug Delilah had used, every photo that now looked staged, every wine bottle they'd finished together. It all now read like planted evidence. The betrayal wasn't just fresh. It had fingerprints. And those prints were manicured, polished, and painted in Delilah's favorite shade of rouge. She stood at the staircase and looked down at the entryway where Delilah had once stumbled in drunk at 2 a.m., laughing about her date with a hedge fund guy who ghosted her after 3 nights. Vivienne had wrapped her in blankets and whispered, "You deserve better." The same woman now whispered to Grayson in her bed with her sheets, while Noah slept 3 rooms away. 1,000 moments flickered behind Vivienne's eyes, like a real unraveling. Matching tattoos on spring break, crying together during the notebook. The time Delilah slapped Vivienne's ex outside a bar for cheating, a performance she now knew was rehearsal for her own role. That afternoon, she opened an old notebook tucked beneath her design sketches. It was a friendship journal they'd kept through college, a childish but sacred thing. Vivienne flipped through pages filled with dreams, secrets, late-night rants. One entry from Delilah stopped her breath. "If I ever betray you, I give you full permission to ruin me." She read it twice. Then 3 times. Vivienne didn't smile. Her hands simply closed the book slowly, as if sealing away a corpse. There was no sentiment left. Only inventory. The doorbell rang. A delivery. Flowers. Lavender roses. Her favorite. No card. She knew that pattern. Grayson. Guilt in full bloom. She set them on the counter without water, watching the petals slowly droop in real time. That night, she and Grayson sat in the same room, watching different realities. He scrolled his phone, the glow painting his face in flickering lies. She observed him, noting every shift of his jaw, every shallow breath. Delilah said she might cancel brunch, he offered without looking up. Vivienne tilted her head. "Oh? I thought she was excited to see me." He looked up then, half a second too slow. "Yeah, just work stuff." A pause. "She misses you." Vivienne nodded, placed her wine glass down with surgical precision, and replied, "I miss her too, like a limb that got amputated but still itches." Later, she entered the guest room, Delilah's favorite, with the teal velvet throw she adored. Vivienne pulled out the bottom drawer and found the silk nightgown Delilah had once borrowed. Still folded. Still here. She brought it to her nose. The scent was faint now, but memory made up for what time had erased. She didn't cry. Instead, she went to her closet and retrieved the clutch she had once lent Delilah for a gala. Inside, a crumpled note, her own handwriting. "You're my person. My always." She burned it over the sink, watching the flame swallow each word like it was starving. By midnight, Vivienne was drafting an email to Ava Sterling. Subject line, "Confidential legal inquiry." She attached scanned bank statements, property records, A signed prenup Delilah had once joked was unromantic. Vivienne now saw it as her final shield. She ended the email with one line. "I believe there is coordinated fraud. I want to protect what's left of my name." The next morning, Vivienne dressed for brunch like she was going to war. Dark navy dress, no jewelry, red lips, but no smile. When she entered the cafe, Delilah rose to hug her. Vivienne let it happen. Let her arms wrap around the same shoulders Grayson had kissed. Let Delilah's voice purr. "You look stunning, V." She sat down across from her, meeting her gaze like a sniper aligning the shot. Delilah spoke of spa days and annoying clients. Vivienne watched her mouth move, registering not words, but performance. And then it came. "Grayson's been so different lately. Think he's hiding something?" Delilah said it with a wink. Vivienne didn't blink. She leaned forward, sipped her espresso, and whispered, "Oh, he's hiding something all right." Delilah tilted her head, smile faltering just a breath. Vivienne smiled back. This time it reached her eyes, because it wasn't hers. It belonged to Karma, now seated firmly at the table. When brunch ended, Vivienne paid the bill. She hugged Delilah again, this time gently pressing her lips near her ear. "Thank you," she said softly, "for showing me exactly who you are." Delilah laughed it off, but her posture stiffened. She felt it. A shift. A tremor beneath the tablecloth. Vivienne walked out into the cold with slow, deliberate steps. She didn't check her phone. She didn't look back. Behind her, a sisterhood burned, and in its ashes, something else began to breathe. It didn't start with a scream. It started with silence. A silence so precise it could slice through the noise of routine. Vivienne sat alone in her design studio, the drafts of a new proposal flickering across her iMac screen. But her focus wasn't on textiles or hues. Her focus was on time, an invisible thread unraveling at the edges of her life. Grayson had said he left work at 5:15 p.m. on Tuesday, a timestamp delivered with corporate exactitude. But Vivienne, who rarely questioned such banalities, now couldn't stop herself from checking. Their calendar app showed the car engine didn't start until 6:42 p.m. 1 hour and 27 minutes. Not enough for a crisis, too much for traffic. But just right for a lie. She didn't call him out. She marked it down, like a watchmaker observing the glitch in a precision mechanism. The next day, she discovered another misalignment. Grayson's supposed client dinner didn't appear on the partner's public schedule. And then Delilah. The text from her had read, "Missed your call. Was at yoga." But Vivienne remembered with painful clarity that the yoga studio on Lincoln had been permanently closed after an electrical fire 6 months ago. No class, no alibi, no accident. Still, she said nothing. Silence became her weapon. She moved through her days like a lens-narrowing focus, watching the man she had once loved and the woman she had once bled for, two stars orbiting her world, begin to collapse inward. On Thursday night, Grayson kissed her goodbye, claiming a networking event. She smiled, let him go, and followed him, not in a spy film caricature but as herself. A woman in tailored wool and ankle boots, walking with the confidence of someone who had nothing left to lose. She watched him park outside a beige brick house, one she didn't recognize. She watched the lights flicker on, and she waited. 98 minutes later, he emerged, face lit, not by shame, but by relief. He drove off into the city lights, unaware that behind him, shadows were learning to move. Vivienne returned home, made tea, and sat in their dimly lit kitchen. When Grayson walked in, she asked about the event. "Tedious," he replied. "No one interesting." She nodded, tucked the answer into her mental archive, and smiled. "Next time, take me. I could use a little tedium." He laughed, kissed her forehead, and went upstairs. She remained downstairs, the steam from her cup blurring the window. She wasn't crying. She was calculating. This wasn't an affair. This was orchestration, and tomorrow she would dissect the instruments. The morning air in the studio felt different, as if even the walls had begun to hold their breath. Vivienne sat at her workstation, not to design, but to investigate. Her fingers no longer sketching curves of fabric, but tracing lines of deceit buried in the digital ether. She powered on her old MacBook, the one she'd stopped using after the studio expansion, and accessed the backup folder synced from their shared iCloud years ago, forgotten by both, but not deleted. The machine buzzed to life slowly, like a witness reluctant to testify. Within minutes, Vivienne unearthed what she didn't know she was hunting, a folder named Consult April, tucked between tax statements and travel itineraries. Inside, voice memos, partial documents, screenshots. She clicked on a voice file labeled Notes, Del.mp3. Delilah's voice spilled into the room, sharp, whispering urgency. She won't notice. It's bundled with the insurance renewal forms. All we need is her e-signature, and the LLC shift's complete. Grayson, we're almost done. Then his voice, quiet, pleased, like someone admiring a clean crime scene. You're a magician. Vivienne didn't move, didn't flinch. Her mind sharpened, slicing through every syllable like a scalpel. Her name, her signature, her business. The betrayal wasn't just personal. It was premeditated, executed with legal precision and sealed with casual arrogance. She dug deeper. A PDF titled Amendment Articles 2023 showed her e-signature, carbon-copied from a contract she signed in June, pasted onto a form transferring managerial rights of Hart Design Studio to Grayson Hart, witnessed by Delilah Cole. The document was time-stamped, notarized, legal, binding, stolen. Vivienne leaned back, eyes glazed but unblinking. Her breathing slowed, not from panic but transformation. This was no longer about love. It was about control, identity, territory. Her fingers trembled for a moment, not with fear, but with velocity, like a car engine about to launch. She opened her drawer, pulled out a flash drive, and copied the folder. Then she picked up her phone and called the one person she'd avoided for years, Ava Sterling, attorney at law. As the line rang, she whispered to no one, "Let's see how magicians handle subpoenas." The scent of bergamot drifted softly in Ava Sterling's office, but nothing could mask the sharp cut of what Vivienne laid on the desk. A flash drive, a manila folder, and her silence. Ava didn't ask for pleasantries. She had known Vivienne long enough to recognize that this wasn't a social visit. She plugged the drive into her monitor, eyes scanning the documents like a surgeon tracing nerve endings. After 15 minutes, she leaned back, fingers steepled under her chin. "They forged legal ownership of your business, not just immoral. That's felony territory." Vivienne's voice was glass. "I want every signature exposed, every lie turned into litigation." Ava nodded slowly, calculating. "We start by freezing all transactions. I'll file a temporary restraining order against changes to the LLC or studio assets. Then we initiate discovery. If Delilah was the notary and Grayson filed the papers, this isn't just theft. This is conspiracy." Vivienne inhaled like she was drawing oxygen for war. "I want him to think he's still ahead. I want her to think I'm still broken. And I want both of them to realize at the exact same moment that I'm neither." That night, Vivienne sat in the studio surrounded by the blueprints she once thought represented dreams. Now, they looked like evidence. Under Ava's instructions, she began documenting every message, every timestamp, every receipt tied to Delilah and Grayson. When she found an email thread titled Transition Strategy with Delilah's name embedded in the metadata, her hands didn't shake. They moved faster. At 2:17 a.m., Ava texted, "Emergency order filed. You have legal possession. Nothing can be touched without court permission." Vivienne looked around the studio, her name embossed in brass on the entrance wall. She whispered to herself, not in fear, but conviction. This place breathes because of me, not them. And then her phone buzzed. Unknown caller. She hesitated, then answered. Silence. A breath. Then a voice she once trusted. "We need to talk." Delilah. The phone rang only once. Vivienne didn't need a name on the screen. She already knew who it was. The air around her had thickened ever since the emergency injunction was filed. Some part of her had been waiting for this moment. She let it ring again, once more, then picked up, not to greet, but to listen. "Viv?" Delilah's voice was syrupy sweet, tinged with something she thought sounded like remorse. "Hey, I think we should talk. Just us. Please." Vivienne's silence was like frost on glass. Clear, cold, slow to melt. "Talk," she said flatly. "Now." Delilah fumbled. "Not like this. In person. Tonight? Your studio?" The audacity stung. "The place you helped try to steal?" she asked, voice silk-wrapped steel. A beat passed. "Delilah, if you walk through that door, you better come with truth and nothing else. One lie, one tear, and I will bury you with your own words." The studio was ready before she arrived. Vivienne arranged the lighting deliberately, not for aesthetic, but precision. Cold LEDs washed over the glass table like surgical lamps. She stood in the center, poised, a silhouette framed by proof. The door opened. Delilah stepped inside, trying to smile, but her face buckled under the weight of expectation. "You look tired," she said gently. Vivienne didn't answer. She motioned to the chair. "Sit." Delilah obeyed. "This isn't me, Viv. You know that. Grayson, he planned it. I just went along." Vivienne circled her like a slow-moving shadow. "You notarized it. You submitted it. You watched me sign and smiled while doing it. You knew." Her voice never rose, but its pressure deepened with each word. "You weren't just his accomplice, Delilah. You were the architect." Delilah's jaw trembled. "It wasn't supposed to be permanent. He said he'd reverse it. It was a business play." Vivienne stopped. "A business play?" She leaned in, eyes unblinking. "My life. My name. My legacy. Reduced to a temporary maneuver." She tossed a folder onto the table. "Here's what you're going to do. You'll sign a sworn statement. Admit to the forgery, to the collusion, and you'll testify against him." Delilah's hands shook. "You're asking me to turn on him." Vivienne didn't blink. "No. I'm giving you a choice. Him or your own survival." Delilah looked down. Tears welled, but Vivienne didn't soften. She watched. She waited. And when Delilah finally whispered, "Okay," Vivienne knew she had just turned a co-conspirator into her sharpest weapon. Delilah signed her name like she was signing away oxygen. Her hand trembled, the pen carving loops through confession. Vivienne stood still, every movement precise. There was no satisfaction in her eyes, only focus. "Say it," she said, voice clipped. "On record." She pointed to the phone tucked beneath the portfolio, its red light blinking like a heartbeat. Delilah looked into it as if it could see her shame. I knowingly helped Grayson Hart falsify documents transferring ownership of Hart Design Studio. I witnessed Vivienne's e-signature under false pretenses. I was aware he intended to assume full managerial control." Her voice broke. "I'm sorry." Vivienne didn't react. "No one asked for your apology. Just your accuracy." She retrieved the signed affidavit, locked it into a folder, and placed it into her bag like loading a weapon. Delilah slumped back, trying to collect herself. You know, he said you'd never find out. He actually laughed. Called you... what was it? So predictably distracted. Vivienne turned slowly. Distracted? Delilah nodded, almost like a child hoping for absolution. He thought you'd be too busy creating, dreaming, loving him. Vivienne stepped forward, eyes locked. He was right. For a time, but not anymore. She turned back toward her desk, pulled out a second folder. You're not the only one who recorded things. She pressed play. Grayson's voice filled the room, rich and arrogant. Once she signs, I'll have the studio. Delilah, you can do whatever you want after that. I'm done pretending. Then Delilah's own reply. What about her equity? Grayson laughed. Gone. Ghosted. We'll shift it before she notices. The silence after was volcanic. Delilah covered her mouth. You had this all along? Vivienne didn't look back. I had fragments. Now I have the whole picture. Then the knock came. 2 sharp taps at the glass door. Ava Sterling walked in, sleek, suited, and carrying a file marked Pre-Litigation Disclosure. She laid it gently on the table. Grayson's been served. Court date is locked. Delilah, congratulations. You're our star witness. Delilah turned pale. Vivienne raised an eyebrow. Welcome to the other side. As Delilah sat speechless, surrounded by the remnants of her ambition, Vivienne stepped away from the table, her voice the final verdict. This isn't revenge. It's realignment. Karma. With paperwork. And then she walked out. Calm, composed, and finally, free. There was something off about the way the studio breathed lately. The air moved differently, too fast near the vents, too still by the filing cabinets. Vivienne noticed it the way a conductor senses a discordant note in an orchestra. It wasn't paranoia. It was instinct, honed by betrayal. On Tuesday morning, she arrived earlier than usual, just as the sun fractured across the glass roof and the espresso machine hissed awake. No one had seen her yet. From behind the frosted panels of her office, she stood and watched. 2 junior designers leaned closer than usual, whispering, their iPads angled away from the hallway. A phone slipped into a tote bag mid-conversation. Another assistant, Mia, flinched when Vivienne opened the shared folder and questioned why all budget proposals from the last month had been reclassified. The answer, a system error, arrived too fast, too polished. But the moment that unraveled it all came quietly. Vivienne walked past the break room and heard her own name, a whisper, sharp and hushed, slicing through the air like a shard of ice. She froze. The voice belonged to someone she trusted, Theo, her lead visual strategist, a man who'd helped sketch the brand's identity from day one. He said, "She's starting to connect dots. If he wants to do this clean, it has to be now." Another voice answered, lower, female, nervous. "Do you think she suspects us?" Vivienne backed away before the air turned. She didn't need more words. She understood subtext now better than any fabric texture. This wasn't about trust anymore. It was containment. She returned to her office like nothing had happened. Her face remained unreadable, her eyes scanning through layers of pretense. She typed a note to herself, not on her computer, but on a legal pad she would destroy later. They are watching from the inside. Grayson has eyes here. The betrayal no longer stung, it calcified into resolve. She activated her off-grid laptop, one that had never touched the company's Wi-Fi, and started building her next move, not just retaliation, but filtration. Who stays? Who's been bought? Who gets exposed? By 6:04 p.m., she left the studio with a quiet nod. But before the lights shut off, she slid a black case under her desk, a new surveillance kit ordered from a private supplier in Nevada. She didn't need security cameras to keep her safe. She needed them to remember who the threat really was. As the studio lights blinked out behind her, Vivienne whispered under her breath, not out of fear, but clarity. They think they're operating in shadows, but shadows belong to those who understand light. 3 days passed, and the whispers turned into silence, an unnatural surgical silence, the kind you only hear before something collapses. Vivienne didn't react. She smiled during client meetings, nodded in presentations, and reviewed pitch decks as if nothing beneath the glass skin of her studio had shifted. But beneath that surface, she was engineering her own surveillance net, each thread designed not to catch, but to choke. The device from Nevada came in black foam casing, no logos, no instruction manuals, just precision. Inside, a pin-sized camera disguised as a ventilation screw, an audio transmitter embedded in a stylus, and a trigger that could remotely ping movement across 3 zones. By Sunday night, they were all installed, one in the conference room ceiling, one inside the break room cabinet, and the last beneath the long oak table in her office. She tested them at 2:43 a.m. with the lights off, only the hum of the air purifier masking her breath. They all worked perfectly. The first break came at 11:08 a.m. Monday morning. She watched from her off-grid laptop in real time as Theo entered her office with someone he clearly didn't want on record, Mia. "She's losing it," he whispered. "We stall one more filing deadline, and Ava's firm won't be able to backdate her claim. He said delay, not destroy. Just slow her down." Mia replied fast, voice dry, rehearsed. "She asked me twice why our Dropbox logs didn't match. I said it's running updates. She didn't bite." Theo sighed. "Grayson's getting impatient." And then, as if fate needed to twist the knife deeper, Mia added, "He shouldn't have slept with me if he didn't want leverage." Vivienne paused the feed, not from shock, but from sheer velocity of thought. So that's how Grayson bound loyalty. Not with vision, with bodies. She reopened her legal pad, wrote a single word, leverage, and underlined it 3 times. The pieces were coming together. This wasn't a betrayal. This was a network. He wasn't seducing for pleasure. He was building liability. Vivienne didn't just need to expose them. She needed to dismantle the entire ecosystem. But first, she needed confirmation. 1 sentence. 1 name. And it came at 11:09:42 a.m. Theo looked toward the door and whispered, "You did delete the surveillance footage from the South Hall camera after our lunch with Grayson, right?" Mia nodded. "It's gone. He said she never checks that one." Vivienne smiled. Tiny, wicked, unhurried. That camera hadn't worked in over 2 months. There was no footage to delete. But now she had the proof they thought it existed, and that they tried to erase it. The real footage, however, the one from her covert lens, was crystal clear. Vivienne copied the clip, encrypted it, and uploaded it to Ava's private case file system. No message, no explanation, just a title. Asset. Studio Mole.mp4. As she shut the laptop, her reflection in the dark screen looked calmer than it had in weeks. Not because the war was over, but because the battlefield was finally visible. And for the first time, she wasn't guessing. She was hunting. Vivienne didn't call Theo into her office. She waited until the studio had emptied out, until only the janitor's mop echoed in the hallway, and the city outside had gone dark with the kind of stillness reserved for choices you can't walk back from. Then, she texted him 1 line. "I need to speak with you. Now." Studio C. No punctuation, no explanation. 15 minutes later, Theo arrived, shirt slightly unbuttoned, face trying to wear confusion. He knocked once and Vivienne didn't answer. She just opened the door. No greeting, no chair offered, Just a glass table, 2 folders, and a laptop with a paused video feed glowing like a slow-burning fuse. "You know what I hate more than betrayal?" she asked, voice low, steady, as she stepped back into the light. "Laziness. You didn't even bother using a VPN." Theo's eyes flicked to the screen, then back to her. "Viv, I don't know what this—" "Stop!" Her voice could have frozen gasoline. "Mia's already confirmed everything. Don't bother performing. This isn't theater. It's a reckoning." Theo's jaw clenched, but his eyes betrayed fear. "It wasn't supposed to go that far. He said you wouldn't fight, that you'd fold if it looked legal." Vivienne walked slowly to the table, pulled out a sheet, the legal motion Mia's whisper had referenced. "And now that I've filed motion to subpoena every log, every transfer, every internal memo, you realize this wasn't just corporate chess, right?" He said nothing. She tapped the table once. "How long?" He hesitated, then answered like a man who had already accepted drowning. 3 months, since the Miami pitch. That's when he first tested how much I'd protect the studio. Said he'd make me creative director once the transfer was finalized." Vivienne's laugh wasn't cruel. It was surgical. "You sold your loyalty for a title, one that never existed." She leaned in closer now, voice almost a whisper. "But here's the part you don't know. Ava filed a request to the Board of Professional Accountability this morning. False representation, manipulation of internal communications, corporate sabotage. You're already under review. And this," she tapped the USB drive beside the laptop, "makes you complicit in premeditated internal theft." Theo blinked rapidly. "You're going to destroy me." "No," she said, voice flat. "You did that yourself. I'm just signing the receipt." And then she did something he didn't expect. She walked away, turned her back. "Take that folder," she said, still facing the window. "Walk out of here. Go talk to Ava. She's willing to negotiate a statement in exchange for immunity. But if you stall, even an hour, I'll drag your name across every court and boardroom this industry knows." He didn't speak, just grabbed the folder and walked out, slower than he arrived, like someone trying to disappear through polished floors. Vivienne exhaled only when she heard the click of the glass door shut. Not relief, not victory, but reallocation of energy. The mole had a face now, but the eyes, the real eyes watching, were still in the dark. And that, she whispered to herself as the city lit beneath her like circuitry, is what makes this war beautiful. The studio was empty again, but this time it felt colder. Not physically, but spiritually, like someone had exhaled secrets into the walls and left them to echo. Vivienne moved through the space like a curator in a crime museum she didn't know she'd been building. Every object felt different now. The brass lamp Grayson had picked out 3 years ago, the marble pen tray Delilah once complimented, even the thermostat. Why had it been adjusted 4 degrees higher for 2 weeks straight? She paused by the south-facing bookshelf and stared. There was a tiny glint at the corner where the shelving met the wall, barely visible unless the light hit it right. She pulled out a paperweight, knelt slowly, and saw it. A pinhole. Too deliberate to be dust, too centered to be random. She didn't panic. Instead, she opened her old off-grid laptop again, reconnected to the encrypted scanner she'd installed last week for checking outbound signals. One ping, then another, and another. Not from her cameras, from somewhere else. Something transmitting from inside the walls, bouncing off devices she didn't own. She followed the signal path and her screen traced a route toward the HVAC control panel. Her heart beat once. Loud. It wasn't paranoia. It was confirmation. She climbed the narrow maintenance stairwell to the server room, a place few employees ever entered. It was locked, but she still had the old analog key from when she insisted every founder must know every bolt of their kingdom. Inside, the room was cool, dry, humming. She found the panel, pulled it open, and there, nested in the wiring, was a slim, corporate-grade data recorder. No sticker, no ID. Professional. Silent. Deadly. She unplugged it carefully and dropped it into an anti-static bag. Her fingers didn't tremble, but her mind did, because only one person knew this layout. Only one person had supervised the original build-out of the server configuration. Grayson. She descended the stairs, bag clutched tight, and walked into her office, where the lights felt suddenly too warm. She closed the blinds, sat down, plugged the device into her sandbox system, and waited. It took only a few minutes, dozens of folders, months of recordings, and in one file, dated 2 weeks before she found the first email thread, was her voice. "I'm going to dismantle them both piece by piece." She remembered saying that, in rage, in private. And now, it wasn't private. She leaned back in her chair, air thick around her. This wasn't just a game of surveillance. This was warfare by anticipation. He had planned for her reaction, banked on her pain, maybe even predicted her resistance, and now she had to consider the unthinkable. What if every move she'd made had been recorded, archived, studied? But then, Vivienne smiled, slowly, because if he had been watching her, then he had also watched her win, watched Delilah break, watched Theo fold, watched the court filings, the exposure, the unraveling he'd once orchestrated turn against him. She leaned forward, recorded a new clip into the camera she'd hidden earlier. "To Grayson, I hope you enjoyed the show. Now comes the finale." And with that, she hit export. The silence in the studio that night was not absence of sound. It was compression, like the moment before a glass shatters. Vivienne stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the city writhe below in soft orange, her fingers wrapped around a ceramic mug she hadn't sipped from in hours. Something wasn't right. The studio, her fortress, had always felt like an extension of herself, organic, reactive, familiar. But lately there were echoes she couldn't trace, vibrations that didn't match the usual rhythm. Files she hadn't opened showed recent access logs. Her office temperature had reset to an exact 71.8 degrees 3 nights in a row, always at 2:03 a.m. She wasn't imagining things. The space was breathing without her. She moved calmly through the studio, mug forgotten, until she reached the rear control panel, one she had installed herself during renovations, hidden behind an acoustic tile. She pressed her palm against the cold steel, slid it open, and stared. Inside, nestled where only she and the system contractor were meant to reach, was a slender black box glowing faintly. No label, no port. Just an embedded antenna blinking a slow red pulse. Vivienne didn't need to be told what it was. Grayson's signature was all over it. Minimalist, high-spec, masked beneath false architecture. A corporate-grade transmitter with onboard storage, capable of streaming audio and intermittent low-res video, designed for continuity, not clarity. It had likely been there for weeks, maybe longer. She retrieved the device, wrapped it in a silk scarf, and took it into her private soundproofed office, locking the door behind her. The scanner she'd bought for her own system sweep, intended to find moles, now turned on itself. It took 5 minutes to decrypt, and then came the files. Hundreds, all labeled by date, hour, room. Her voice echoed through the speakers, conversations with Ava, her confrontation with Theo, even the recording of Mia in the break room, things no one else should have heard. And in the middle of it, a chilling revelation, a clip from 2 weeks ago. Vivienne's voice, brittle and defiant, murmuring into the dark. "Let them watch. I'll burn the walls down before I let them win." She remembered saying it. Alone. To herself. Now it was archived, studied. But that wasn't the end. The final file, time-stamped less than 24 hours ago, wasn't audio. It was a single video frame. A still of Vivienne, asleep on the couch in her office, lit only by the glow of her monitor. The image was tight, almost too intimate. A frame not captured from afar, but placed with deliberate proximity. Her breath hitched, not from fear, but from the calculation racing through her brain. He had placed it after the war had already started, not to gain advantage, but to gloat, to remind her. She was never the only hunter. She stared into the dark screen, her own image flickering back at her. Then, without flinching, she turned the camera on herself and hit record. No makeup, no performance, just eyes like steel and a voice like smoke. Grayson, if you're still watching, good. Because what comes next? You don't want to miss it. She uploaded the clip into a dummy server, masked it under a name she knew he'd check. Then she stood, walked to the center of her studio, and turned off every light. Darkness swallowed the room. But, in the dark, Vivienne smiled. Because now, she wasn't just reacting. She was setting the stage, and someone was about to choke on their own surveillance. The air inside courtroom 402 wasn't just thick, it was acidic, as if betrayal had a scent, and everyone had inhaled. Vivienne didn't walk in. She cut through the corridor like a wire pulled taut, each step soundless but thunderous in impact. Black suit, no jewelry, no war paint, just eyes sharp enough to slit memory. Her hands held nothing, yet she carried more than anyone else in the room. Years of love-turned deceit, the blueprints of betrayal carefully folded into a flash drive, and a voice that could now weaponize silence. Grayson sat across from her in a tailored charcoal suit, his posture too perfect, like a statue mimicking sincerity. Delilah occupied the witness bench, smaller than Vivienne remembered, her presence now thin and colorless. Vivienne didn't look at either of them directly. She was here for the reckoning, not the reunion. The judge called order, and Ava Sterling rose like a blade unsheathed. Her voice didn't rise, it sliced. What we present today is not just about signatures and misfiled forms. It is about a designed erosion of trust, a betrayal engineered with corporate precision and intimate access. She tapped the screen behind her. Exhibit A. The projector blinked. The form appeared. Her signature, Vivienne's name, slapped onto legal documents she'd never seen. It wasn't just a forgery. It was a ghost of consent. But Ava wasn't done. Exhibit B. A voice recording began. She'll never see it coming. Grayson's voice hummed through the speakers, confident and low. Delilah, just make sure she signs the bundle with the insurance crap. She always skips the fine print. A hiss spread through the gallery. Vivienne's hands didn't twitch. Her jaw didn't clench. She was past reaction. She was in the phase of calculation. And then came the twist, the silent detonation. Exhibit C, Ava announced, pulled from a surveillance device installed by Mr. Hart without consent in the plaintiff's studio. The screen flickered. A frozen frame appeared. Vivienne, asleep on her office couch, hair tousled, a faint laptop glow bathing her face in vulnerability she never intended to be captured. The room was silent, not out of respect, but because something sacred had just been breached. Grayson's lawyer sprang up, objecting. Illegally obtained. Inadmissible. Ava turned slowly, eyes like flint. If Mr. Hart installed the device, Your Honor, then it is his property. We simply retrieved what he left behind. The judge stared at the screen for a moment longer than necessary. Overruled. Grayson finally blinked. That was all. But it was enough. A crack. A breach. The controlled man now felt heat in his perfectly tailored collar. Ava called Delilah to the stand. She moved like a balloon that had lost half its air, soft, silent, unsure. Her oath was barely audible, her confession even softer. It was his idea. I helped him because he said it would be temporary, that once he got control, he'd put it back in her name. I believed him. Ava tilted her head. And did he? No. He said I was naive, that Vivienne would burn it all down before giving up. A laugh, sharp and dry, escaped someone in the gallery. The judge barked silence, but Vivienne didn't react. She was watching Delilah. Not with hate, with autopsy-level curiosity. The final twist came not from Ava, not from the evidence, but from Delilah herself. I recorded him too. Gasps snapped like lightning across the room. Ava, even Ava, blinked. You what? He scared me. He said if I talked, I'd be next. So I saved our meetings. She held up a second drive. For when he'd turn on me. Because he always turns. The courtroom dimmed as the final clip played. Grayson's voice, venomous lower than before. Vivienne's stubborn. If she gets in your head, remind her who signs the fucking checks now, or I'll remind you. Silence fell again. But this time, it wasn't broken. It expanded. The judge took less than 10 minutes to deliver judgment. Grayson Hart, stripped of all ownership rights, studio access revoked, assets frozen pending felony charges for fraud and unlawful surveillance. Delilah Cole, granted partial immunity in exchange for testimony in civil and criminal proceedings. Vivienne Hart, reinstated as sole owner of Hart Design Studio. Full operational control. No right of appeal granted to defendants. Sentence adjourned. As cameras surged outside the courthouse, Vivienne stepped into the flashing chaos like it was mist. She didn't speak, didn't pause. But when her phone buzzed and the message popped up, "Didn't think you had it in you," she stopped walking, stared, typed only 3 words in reply. "Watch me now." She hit send, lifted her face to the cold Chicago wind, and kept moving forward, past reporters, past betrayal, past what they thought she was capable of. Because the blueprint of betrayal may have been drawn by them, but the architecture of vengeance was hers. The days after the verdict didn't begin with celebration. They began with a stillness so thick it felt like the city itself was holding its breath. Vivienne didn't wake up to champagne or press calls. She awoke to the low hum of her heater, the kind of sound that, in the past, would have gone unnoticed. But now, it was proof she wasn't being watched. No cameras. No whispers. Just the sound of safety. She stood at the same window where months earlier she'd questioned everything, her marriage, her judgment, her worth. Now, wrapped in a slate-gray robe, she watched fog unroll across Chicago's rooftops like a shroud being lifted. She didn't sip her coffee. She held it with both hands like an anchor. This wasn't the end of a war. This was the silence after a battlefield. At the studio, the brass nameplate that once looked like a gravestone now shimmered like a medal. Employees returned, not with uncertainty, but with quiet reverence. Vivienne didn't give speeches. She worked beside them. No more corner office. She shared a communal table, reviewed sketches, laughed, softly. And when someone asked, "How are you, really?" she paused for the first time and answered, "Healing." Grayson's name faded from headlines like a stain being scrubbed from fabric. Delilah vanished entirely. The last photo of her online was a blurry candid at a Vermont diner. Vivienne never spoke of either again. But every so often, she'd glance at the empty chair by the window, and the silence would stretch, thick with memories that no longer hurt, but no longer healed either. Then came the gala. 6 months after the verdict, Heart Studio hosted its first major showcase. Critics called it a resurrection. The theme reflected ruins, garments inspired by structures broken and rebuilt. On the runway walked a model in a gown stitched with thread resembling fractures, raw gold visible. The final piece was a long black coat with a lining embroidered with a single phrase, "Built from Betrayal." The audience rose in a silence louder than applause. After the show, a young designer approached Vivienne, nervous, barely 20. "How do you survive it? The betrayal?" she asked. Vivienne looked her in the eye. "You don't survive it. You architect around it. You turn it into scaffolding." The girl nodded, as if hearing blueprints. That night, Vivienne sat alone in her office, lights dimmed. She opened a drawer and pulled out a small flash drive, silver, fingerprint worn. It held the last recording of Grayson's voice. She didn't play it. She simply looked at it, then dropped it into a glass of ink-black water, watched it sink, watched it disappear. She walked to the studio's front steps. The air was damp. Chicago breathed slowly. Across the street, neon lights from a late-night diner blinked like half-truths. She sat just for a moment, and that's when a voice, familiar, trembling, broke the dark. "Vivienne?" She turned. It was Delilah, pale, smaller, holding nothing but a wrinkled envelope. No apology, just presence. Vivienne didn't flinch, didn't invite her closer. Delilah didn't move forward either. She placed the envelope on the step between them. "I needed to return this," she said. "It was yours. Always." Vivienne waited until Delilah had disappeared into the mist before reaching for the envelope. Inside, a torn sketch, her original concept for Heart Studio's very first logo, dated, signed, crumpled. She hadn't seen it in years. It didn't matter anymore. But somehow, having it back felt like reclaiming a piece of herself she never knew was missing. She didn't frame it. She didn't burn it. She folded it quietly and placed it in her pocket. As she locked the studio door, the city behind her didn't roar. It pulsed. Life moved. Karma had struck, not like lightning, but like erosion, slow, deliberate, unstoppable. And in that silence, Vivienne whispered not to the city, not to Delilah, not even to Grayson. She whispered to herself, "Let them think I'm done. Karma doesn't knock twice, but I do." If this story haunted you, inspired you, left you breathless, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it. Because someone out there is still watching in silence, waiting for karma to find them too. And maybe this is the sign they needed. Comment below. Have you ever walked out of fire, not as ashes, but as proof that fire doesn't win?